I can't believe this, but we are almost at the end of our presentations day. But we are going to be ending with a bang. I'm so excited about this very last session here. But first things, we have a video to show to get us started.
I'm sorry, Mr. Marsh. Show business isn't for me. I'm going back to Allentown.
What was that word you just said? Allentown? I'm offering you a chance to star in the biggest musical Broadway's seen in 20 years, and you say Allentown? Now listen, Sawyer, and listen good. Even if you don't give a damn about me, think of all those kids you'll be throwing out of work if you don't do this. Think of the songs that will wither and die if you don't get up there and sing them. Think of the costumes that will never be seen, the scenery never seen, the orchestrations never heard. Think of our show and the thrill and pleasure it could give to millions. Think of musical comedy, the most glorious words in the English language. Sawyer, think of Broadway, damn it!
Yes, so we're talking Broadway here today, and this is going to be such a fun conversation. We need a little more light on them, Victoria, so we'll be able to see them. So we have Randie Levine Miller and Josh Ellis here. So let me tell you a little bit about both of them, because you're in for such a treat right now. So first of all, I want to introduce you to them. The New York Post calls Josh Ellis the maestro, who has handled the press for some of Broadway's biggest hits, including more than a dozen Tony Award winners. He's worked with a multitude of legendary personalities, and you're going to get to hear some of his amazing stories today, because he is going to share some of the backstage secrets. And he is also an ordained interfaith, interspiritual minister. So if anyone is getting married anytime soon, that's the guy to call, right? Interviewing Josh today is my good friend, Randie Levine Miller, who is a true Broadway babe. Let me tell you, she started going to Broadway, I think, when she was just started to walk, and I think has seen every Broadway show just about ever produced, certainly every musical. We call her the savant. You ask her any question about Broadway, and she could give you that answer. In addition to being a Broadway babe, she is known around town as the hostess with the mostess. She's performed and hosted benefits for the actors, from the Actors Temple, multiple sclerosis, events at the Friars Club where she's hosted and performed. And I mentioned earlier, for 10 years, we were the co-producers, and she was the host of Tomatoes Got Talent, too. And she's really known these days for her celebrity roundtables, which she does at Sardi's once a month. And we would all love to be a fly on the wall there. And I think today we're going to get a little sense of that between these two. So now I'm going to turn it over to you.
I want to say, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women are merely players. They have their entrances and their exits. And Josh Ellis, I don't need this, Josh Ellis has been there for their entrances, and baby, he has been there for their exits also. And he is one of the most respected and legendary PR people, to the point where I've heard stars thank him at the Tony Awards, and he basically trained everybody who's on Broadway now. So let's just get to the good stuff. Okay, so Josh, tell everybody what a press agent does.
Okay, basically the job of a press agent is getting your client's name in or out of the news. Good news in, bad news out. Sounds easy? It's torturous. In the theater, the job is called press agent or publicist. If you do the exact same job for the President of the United States, your title is press secretary. These days, everyone has press agents. Even Pope Leo XIV has a press agent, but he is called the President of the Pontifical Council for Social Communications. But call it what you will, it's the same job. If you're in politics, the job is getting elected and staying in office. If you're in the theater, the job is getting asses into seats.
Well, Josh has gotten a lot of asses into seats. He's also handled a lot of asses in the theater. So I'm going to start with the fact that you handled some of the most difficult human beings who wound up actually loving you like a son. And I'm going to start with Yul Brynner, who you got to work with and who was a very difficult man, but he thought of you almost as a son. Tell the story.
Okay. Yul Brynner was famous for chewing up and spitting out press agents. I happen to have grown up loving The King and I saw the movie at the Roxy Theater. If anyone remembers, is old enough to remember what the Roxy was. It was like Radio City Music Hall. And I thought it was an enormous thrill to be able to work on the show with him. But he was very exacting. He wanted his dressing room painted brown, a phone that had a 20-foot long cord. He wanted a refrigerator with Fresca in it. Very, very specific. I mean, we went to the theater to look at it, and this was the Uris now Gershwin Theater. He walks into the lobby and goes, "It is far too bright. We have to have lighter, we have to have peachy pink bulbs, 65 watt, because it will make the ladies in the audience look more beautiful." And the producers kind of like look around and they realize in the lobby of the Gershwin there are easily 1,000 light bulbs. So it wasn't, okay. Then we go into the theater and there's a proscenium arch and it's painted white. And he goes, "Whoever heard of a proscenium arch painted white? It will keep the audiences paying attention to the sides and up above, but not focusing in on the show. It must be painted brown." The proscenium arch got painted brown. Last piece, we're crossing the stage and he goes, "This floor is not good." And the producers go, what's the matter with the floor? He goes, "Don't you realize in The King and I that the cast goes down on their knees all through the show? A rubber floor that's very thick will protect their knees and it will protect our beautiful show. So we must have a pliable floor." And they go, "Well, that sounds awfully expensive." And then, well, long story short, of course we got the rubber floor and it did prevent injury. So the lesson learned, he had a method to his madness. I wanted specifically to talk about an interview that he did kind of maybe 6 months into the run. We go to do the Merv Griffin show. Merv Griffin had moved out to the West Coast, and this was just a special 2-week engagement that he did at the Ed Sullivan Theater, now where they do the Colbert Show. And there's very little dressing room space backstage. It's tiny backstage. And we come into the theater and they say, "Welcome, Mr. Brynner, you're in dressing room number 1. Well, of course he's in dressing room number 1. And we get to the dressing room door, and it's locked. And that is not common for Yul Brynner to come to a locked dressing room door. It's usually opened and totally ready for him with the Fresca. So we knock on the door, and a voice says, "Who is it?" And he goes, "It's Yul Brynner." And the door opens, and it's Ethel Merman. And I guess we're bunking out today together. So we come into the dressing room, and she's standing there in this beautiful dress, and Yul Brynner says to me, "Get another chair for me, Miss Merman, please sit down." And she goes, "Forget it, Yul, this is my standing up and singing dress." So she's fine, the two of us sit down, she stands. Merv Griffin does his whole bit before Ethel Merman comes out. And then he says, after the break, Ethel Merman is going to come out and do a medley of all her most famous songs. She goes, that sounds like a cue if I ever heard one. So she leaves the dressing room. We're back in that little room, okay? About 15 minutes later, after she does her 25-song medley, she comes back into the dressing room. Out! She screams to Yul Brynner. I mean, who screams to Yul Brynner? Out! The two of us go out into the hallway and the door shuts again. And when we come back about a minute or two later, it looks all the same. She's back up on stage with Merv to talk a little. And we look and there in the middle of the room is the dress that we just saw her in. Okay? It is so stiff to keep her proportions neat and tidy that it just stands by itself in the dressing room. And I say, what is this? And he goes, she told us she was in her standing up and singing dress. Okay, she's up on stage now with Merv in her sitting down and talking dress. And that was Yul Brynner.
So just,
How are we doing on?
okay,
Okay, I'm going to try to make these a little faster.
okay, so, okay, fine. Ethel Merman, I seem to remember a story about you having dinner with Ethel Merman. So let's segue to that one.
Okay. I'm in New York, and I just joined the Press Agents Union as an apprentice, and a friend invites me to have dinner with Ethel Merman. I go, oh my God. It turns out that Ethel Merman's granddaughter was a student of his. Ethel Merman said, would you like to come to dinner with my granddaughter? And they called me up and said, how could we have dinner with Ethel Merman without inviting his biggest fan? So I am just in awe of Ethel Merman. I mean, I can barely speak. And she has no genuine grandmother qualities. And, like her granddaughter will say, well, what's new, Grandma? And she'll go, well, I just did some concertizing in Cincinnati. And she talks to her granddaughter like she's being interviewed on a television show. Eventually, she runs out of steam, and there's total silence. And I think, how many times in my lifetime will I have an opportunity to ask Ethel Merman the question that I most want to ask her? And so I kind of just, the silence is continuing. I'm going, can you tell us about creating Rose's Turn? Rose's Turn is the big final number in Gypsy. This coming week there's a story about Audra McDonald. It goes on for pages and pages about how she created Rose's Turn. It's the biggest, it's the greatest single-person showstopper in Broadway history. And so I mean, Ethel Merman originated it. It's hers. They wrote it for her. And so I say, Rose's Turn, she has absolutely no interest in the subject at all. And she realizes that she's stuck. She has no other topic to talk about. Well, Jerry Robbins, our director, choreographer, was on a little platform. And Julie Stein, our composer lyricist, was at the piano. There was Jerry. Julie played and Jerry did the whole number for me. And when he was done, he said, okay, Ethel, now you get up and you do it. So I got up on that little platform and I did it. And Jerry said, that's fine, Ethel. End of story. I want to strum and drag. I want her to just bleed at that table. But no, I mean, she just had no time for it. She finishes the story and goes, who wants dessert? I, for one, want Cherry's Jubilee. She cared more about that Cherry's Jubilee than she cared about Rose's Turn. That is a fact.
So, well, stop looking at your clock.
I'm very conscious of it.
Let us know when we have 10 minutes left. Okay.
Give me a lot more time.
Okay, so,
Thank you.
as we would say. Okay, so I'm going to segue since she also did Gypsy, not a very good job, I'm afraid, but Bernadette Peters. And Josh was the first press agent on Into the Woods, starring Bernadette Peters. And he got to work with Stephen Sondheim, of course, and there's a wonderful anecdote which I would love for you to share.
Stephen Sondheim was famous for writing songs very, very close to the show's opening. And frequently those songs were important and were terrific. Like Comedy Tonight and A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, and very late in rehearsal, Send in the Clowns for Glynis Johns. Into the Woods, we were pretty set, and 5 days before the opening, he wrote a new song for Bernadette Peters. Not just any song, it was called Last Midnight, and it is her big finale. The problem is that the playbills had already been printed, and there was another song in its place, and I did not want to put a slip into the program to say, this song is out and this song is in, because I thought, that looks so cheesy and crappy, and it's a Stephen Sondheim Broadway premiere. So I called Playbill and I said, look, Stephen Sondheim has written this new song called Last Midnight. Is there any way that you will reprint the playbills, putting in the new song? And they said, it's really an unusual request and an expensive request, but it is Stephen Sondheim, and so we'll put it in. And so you'll understand at times, I just gave them it verbally, take out one song and put in Last Midnight. Okay, we get to the critics' performances, and I'm in the lobby of the Martin Beck Theater, now the Al Hirschfeld, and there are piles and piles of playbills. I'm surrounded by, we're talking about 10,000 playbills for all the critics' performances. And I open up the playbill just to make absolutely sure it's correct, and I look and they've taken out the other song that was supposed to go out. And in 10,000 playbills, it says Lost Midnight. The unwelcome call of Stephen Sondheim. Hi, Steve. It's Josh. I have good news and bad news. The good news is they have removed the old song, and they have put in, Lost Midnight, not Last Midnight. I have 2 ways I think we could possibly fix this. How would you feel about writing a new song for Bernadette this afternoon called Lost Midnight? Or I will have to get my staff over to the theater and with fine point Sharpies change the O's to A's in 10,000 playbills. It's your choice. And he says, get out the Sharpies. So they are now collector's items, needless to say. And one thing about Into the Woods, and I just want to get this as a point across about it, most people, when we talk about shows, think about the finished product. But when we first get the shows, it's just a script. And in those days, those scripts were typewritten and mimeographed and, bound together. And you are creating an image for something that doesn't exist yet. Something that I'm explaining to you, and I had to explain to the press for decades. They'd say, oh, we'd love a picture of Bernadette Peters in her witch costume. And you go, it doesn't exist yet. Okay, I have the sketch from the artist, and I have a picture of her, but they haven't even made the costume yet. She hasn't worn the costume yet. It's that new that it's a work in progress until that curtain goes up at the critics' performance. And that's the thrill of it, because it's magical each time when that certain thing happens, and you go, this is what was the final result of all of our work.
So now I'm going to segue to another one of the most difficult people in show business who really, when I say fell in love with you, he had such a soft spot for you. It's quite unbelievable, but your relationship with David Merrick.
Okay, the name David Merrick may not mean a lot anymore, which is really a shame. I think we should have a theater on Broadway named after him. The number of shows that he produced 90 Broadway shows, including 40, the originals, but I don't want to keep saying the original 40.
Which we just saw part of.
Oliver, I Do, Promises, Promises, Ethel Merman in Gypsy. The list goes on and on and on. He was famous for doing something which was duplicated many years later, unfortunately. He was very famous for firing people, and he had a very soft voice. He would fire people by saying, "Oh, you're fired." And he was difficult. At the same time, there was a part of him, and I guess I'm not even sure this is where you went. I worked on a huge flop with him. It closed out of town. It was called The Baker's Wife. It starred Topol, who was the original Tevye in the movie Fiddler on the Roof, and the aforementioned Bernadette Peters. It was written by Stephen Schwartz, who went on to other things, including Wicked. But this one was a flop. But to understand David Merrick's craziness, whatever, okay, we are at the Kennedy Center, and there are about 20 people in the audience watching this most pathetic matinee of The Baker's Wife. The show he's decided to close the show, not to bring it into New York. And we are standing in the wings watching it, and he says, "Oh, are we having fun?" And I realized that's the key to it all. Okay, that is the question to ask. Are we having fun? And even though that show was a big flop, 5 years later, when he decided to do 42nd Street, he asked me first to do it. The sad part of the story is that I was doing so many other shows at the time, I had to turn him down. And I thought, okay, I get it. It's 42nd Street. Howard Champion has died on opening night. I am not involved in it at all during that time. And about 5 weeks later, I got a call at 7:30 in the morning, and it's David Merrick. "How would you like to be the press agent of the biggest hit on Broadway?" It sounds like David Merrick. I recognize the voice, but it's home, and it's 7:30. And he said, "I just fired the show's press agent, and I want you to take over right away." And sure enough, he meant it, and we met for lunch that day, and I handled it for the following 8.5 years, just not the first 5 weeks. Also, he did not like to have meetings in his office. He was afraid that the theater owners had bugged his office. So we had to go to very undistinguished, non-theaterish restaurants to have meetings. And I remember the one right after I got hired, and it was at Wienerwald. I don't know if you remember Wienerwald. It was on Broadway between 50th and 51st. He is discussing the campaign for 42nd Street, and we are surrounded by thousands of beer mugs and artificial Edelweiss. And he is saying, and he says, the first thing he says out of his mouth is, "We're not going to talk about Howard Champion again, ever." I thought, "You're not going to talk about the director who died on opening night ever?" This is getting too long, but I think
it's a good story. Tell it.
So I'm thinking, okay, I know David Merrick loves press stunts, just anything that will get media attention. And I think, okay, how do we get publicity for 42nd Street that does not mention Gower Chip? And I come up with the idea of having an audition for preteen tappers who, in 10 years, will be able to go into 42nd Street, and it'll be like their audition for 10 years hence. And I think, well, I tell them we can do it cheaply, we can do it in a rehearsal room, we can do it with a single piano. We go, oh no, we have to do it on the stage of the Winter Garden. The little kiddies have to get costumes from home and bring them with them. Our dance captain will teach them the opening number of the show. We will have the curtain down when the press comes in, and then the curtain will go up very, very slowly, just like it does at the beginning of the show, and we'll be able to see our little preteen tappers. This will cost a fortune to do, okay? I mean, he is like doing it top, okay? But I have to say, the press came out in swarms, and when those little preteen tappers, which I hasten to add, there were over 200 of them, it really was an event. Okay, the New York Times, okay, they have no sense of humor, which I guess you figured that out somewhere along the line, okay? They send a reporter and a photographer, but decide not to run a story. And the writer says, it's obviously a press stunt. I go, yes, it actually is obviously a press stunt. That's why we did it. And she goes, and the New York Times does not cover press stunts. But 8 years later, 2 of those little preteen tappers actually went into the Broadway company of 42nd Street. Wow. So in Merrick land, even something that seems totally artificial and fake can sometimes turn out real.
That's a great story. Is there any video available of that?
I guess the TV crews have it. I don't.
Well, talk about TV crews. It's interesting. I remember I was told 4 words will get you coverage, and this was from the assignment editor at NBC. Tits, tots, vets, and pets. So you had tits and tots, and I'm sure you've had the other 2. So, which is terrific. Now, I also remember, in terms of publicity stunts, you and Eartha Kitt on the camel, near the camel sign.
Timbuktu. It was a big flop. It was a remake of Kismet's Reset in Africa, and the leading actress was Eartha Kitt. Eartha Kitt, who was unpredictable and brilliant and crazy. And I came up with a stunt. I would rent 2 camels, one for her, one for Melba Moore, her co-star in Timbuktu, and they will ride through Times Square because one of the critics said, take the train, take a bus, take a bike, or take a camel, but get to Timbuktu. So I get to Times Square, and there's no Melba Moore. And Eartha Kitt gets up, they lower the camel, and they put her up on the camel, and she's quite delighted to be up there. And she looks down at me and she says, I refuse to go through Times Square alone. Joshua, get up. So they lower the camel, and I get up on the camel and ride through Times Square with Eartha Kitt.
And was that right near the camel sign? Remember Camel cigarettes?
So I can just say one other, okay, I know you're going like, oh my God, he'll just, okay.
Yeah, but he's interesting.
Eartha was quirky, as I said, okay? I scheduled an interview with her, and I know that this is Randie's one of her absolutely favorite stories, so I'm telling you.
It is.
We did an interview, we scheduled an interview with a European publication, a radio program, and literally 5 minutes before it was supposed to happen, Eartha canceled. And I called up the the company explained it, and I said, maybe we can do it a week later, and they said, yeah, that would be fine. Called back Eartha, yeah, we scheduled it a week later, and, remember, Eartha, it's a telephone interview. You don't have to put on makeup, you don't have to do hair, you just talk on the phone. It is perfectly fine, I will do it next week. Fine, so next week comes, a few minutes before the interview, I am unable to do the interview. Okay, I scheduled a third time. I thought, okay, Eartha, are you sure you want to do it? You don't have to if you don't want to. No, I absolutely am sure. It plays in Europe, and they know me from my many European appearances, so of course I want to do it. Fine, so we rescheduled it for the following week. And the third time, she cancels yet again. I think, I can't put up with this crap. Okay? I say to my office staff, please, I'm going to go into my office, I'm going to shut the door, no calls, I'm going to do the interview. Okay? I have impersonated Eartha so many times. I know her routines backwards and forwards. Okay? It's like, I do it like second nature. It's like I don't have to work to do it. And the hard part was just not laughing, And I do the interview, and the person goes, the first question was like, what really did happen with you and President Johnson and Mrs. Johnson that got you thrown out of the White House? And I know Eartha's answer is, I have to get over my indignation of that question. I do not want to answer. Do you understand? It is not a topic that I like to talk about. And sure enough, worked like the 15 minutes of that, and they were happy. And Eartha never asked me whatever happened to that interview.
This is terrific.
What?
I hope you can continue your stories at our wine reception.
Well, invite us back for next year.